Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the 17th episode of the Cut to Scene podcast. This is Aditya, as always, with Devansh. And we are back after a small gap of a week. And we're back with this movie called Rang De Basanti. And as most of you who are listening to this might know, Rang De Basanti is a 2006 film. If I remember correctly, it released on January 26, 2006, because I had seen it on the theater opposite my school on the way back home from school. It stars Aamir Khan,
Atul
Siddharth,
Kulkarni.
Kunal Kapoor, Atul Kulkarni, Sharman Joshi, Soha Ali Khan, R. Madhavan, Wahida Rahman, Alice Patten,
Alice Patten.
and a lot of other people. Also, Anupam Kher and Kiran Kher thrown into the mix. The story follows Alice Patten, who plays Sue, as her in her journey of coming to India from Britain and trying to shoot this movie based on her grandfather's diary, which a grandfather basically was a jailer in an old English jail in India, and he was the one who was responsible for hanging a lot of these revolutionaries. And it's basically his diary gives her inspiration to come to India and shoot a movie where she meets a group of friends consisting of all these characters that I've described. And then she feels that they are the best people to make the movie. And what follows is how, in the process of making the movie, the friends also go through a emotional as well as mental transformation, and how it all leads to the end where they all get killed. So yeah, that is the movie. If I mean, we recommend you watch the movie. It's not freely available on Netflix. If you have a Netflix subscription, it's available there. So please do go watch the movie. Okay, Devansh, first thoughts.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I am tempted to say that the movie was before its time, but then but then I think that it's evergreen, so to say, rather than before its time. Uh, it is also a cinematic masterpiece. I think. I mean, if you look at the movie, it has a runtime of around 3 hours roughly. Not exactly 3 hours. Some what 157 minutes. So 2.5 घंटे का runtime, which in the current age would be considered like on the longer end of things. But at the same time, the movie is constantly entertaining. It also constantly it keeps you on the edge of the seat, and it serves you the palette of all emotions. Um, so so yeah, those are the things that I liked. It was rightly awarded with a lot of it received a lot of critical acclaim as well as a lot of popular acclaim. So I think it is very. I don't know. While watching that movie, I was always forced to reflect on that relevance and the context where that was set and the context that it has the potential to be watched in right now. And we'll come to that in the later half of the podcast, I believe. But first, we'll probably talk about the technicalities of the film as usual.
Mhm.
So yeah, what do you feel about the technicalities?
Yeah, I think over the years, I mean, almost what 13 years, 14 years have passed since the movie was made, and of course, it's acquired this cult status over the years. It also had a cult status when it released, but I thought that the cult status, at least in people's heads, was built mainly due to the thematic aspects of the film, and rightly so, because the theme of the film is so strong. It's about a reawakening in a new India, exactly like what had happened 90 or 80 years ago from that time, in the India which was ruled by the British. And there is a certain class of politicians who are ruling India in the current day, who are very much like the British. So the thematic aspects of the film are clearly very, very strong, and it speaks of revolution and revolutionary songs. So of course there's a lot of reading to be done in a thematic aspect, but and rightly so. I also was blown away by the themes of the film when I watched it as a kid, sixth standard kid, uh, and also afterwards, from whenever I watched it. But the latest watch, which I did around 2 weeks ago, and then again yesterday or day before, the biggest thing that struck me was the cinematic aspects of the film, and I would really love if we dwell deep into that. So first of all, the cinematography, right? I think the cinematography of the film is something extremely different, which I've not seen even in foreign films, right? It's a very novel way of deciding to shoot a film. Basically, let's say, I mean, for example, take the extreme overtly used the Dutch cut or the Dutch angle, right? So the Dutch angle, for people who don't know, is when you frame a certain scene with a tilted camera. I mean, nowadays it's become all popular on Instagram, I guess, that angle. But basically that is generally used in films across the world to show a certain sense of unease or disorientation, right? And Binod Pradhan, who's the cinematographer, very veteran film cinematographer, and who's done really great work. Devdas, I can never forget the song. What's that song in which Madhuri Dixit, not Madhuri Dixit, Aishwarya Rai is dancing, starting with?
Oh,
सिलसिला ये चाहत का. Yeah,
चाहत
that.
का.
Oh my God, there's one or two shots in that song which are mind blowing. It's all captured by Vinod Pradhan. So yeah, and so he, though he is a very accomplished cinematographer, he uses a fundamentally different style of filmmaking and shooting for this film. I mean, of course, it would be in conjunction with uh, the director Rakeysh Omprakash Mehra and the writer's vision of it, Kamlesh Pandey, their vision of it. But there is a certain sense in the way the most shots are taken. For example, the touch angles are taken even in shots where there is no reason for you to feel uneasy. But I think that is the first impression that I got from the. So for example, there's this one shot in the start, right, where Sue and Soha Ali Khan go to meet these people in that well in which they are, and there even the first shot when the character of Kunal Kapoor is introduced, they use this Dutch angle. And I was like, why the fuck would you do that? Right? You don't need to do that at all. But if I think more about the film itself, I think there is that overt use because it is trying to fundamentally be new and also fundamentally break barriers of what was there before it, while also doing that in the script, right? It's trying to be revolutionary in the script and the way it's telling the story. It's also trying to be revolutionary in the way it's showing things on screen. So the Dutch angle is one. The varied use of frame rates and shutter speeds is so. For example, what I'm talking about, let's say, take the class song Rang De Basanti, for example, the title track of the film. You see that in most of in the dance sequences, what the cinematographer does is he records the whatever the dance sequences in a low frame rate and plays it as the normal speed. Due to which we get this issue, we get this feel of slightly stuttering motion, which provides a very nice new age indie feel to the song, right? So that's one of them, and there's also this use of very low shutter speeds in this high shutter speeds in this Khoon Chala song, which is to evoke a sense of chaos and panic amongst people. So I think the cinematography is a masterpiece. But before I go on to other things, I would like to know even your opinions about it.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about it, the Dutch angle, I mean, does a lot for this film. If you look at the film, the palette that the film uses, it's a very saturated, very colorful palette, as would be like it, and like it suits the name also, right? And if you look at scenes like the car races when they are heading towards the dhaba,
Mhm.
those scenes are filled with blurred and elongated shots of these neon lights. So it's very I don't have the right word for it, but it's very you are reminded of graphic novels, in the sense panels of graphic novels that would show that sort of action. So in that sense, I think it was very effective. Another aspect which was very integral to the film was also the use of sepia. the color toning, the color grading when we are talking about the past, and they decide to do it very very distinctively in the brown and white palette. Um, I think that is a very very brave call that a filmmaker needs to take early on, of how they will show essentially very very integral parts of the film, because often what can happen is that can render your reimagination or reconstruction ineffective if that is not the correct uh, if that is not the correct way to show it. So what I mean is that, let's say it was shown in, why would it be shown in sepia and not black and white, let's say. So there can be extensive discussion about that. What I was very impressed by on the writing aspect, or matlab on the technical front on the writing aspect, is the structure of the film, and that is where I had more questions also. Uh, but but before that, yeah, the cinematography is amazing. I also love the sets that they have used. You know, the set of using a Delhi University college in placing this, and then using that well setting to show, to bring out themes where the youth is trying to break free, and you know how the youth was on the verge. There was this in like globalization happening on the youth's front also, because this was the time when the early internet era had come in, and the youth was exposed to more international art. So there was more international music, graffiti. All these elements are shown very effectively. So yeah, I think those were things that worked in the film's favor, right?
Right.
Would you like to talk about the structure of the film?
Sure. Okay, let's go into the structure of the film. So, I mean, see, first of all, I want to start by saying that the film is highly mainstream in the character choices and the dialogue choices. In the sense, there is no there are a lot of so-called masala foreshadowing moments in the film which are there, and melodrama and things like that. So it's in no means is it a parallel art cinema kind of film. Okay, having put that out of the way, why Rang De Basanti stands out amidst the films that have come before it and after it is exactly because of the narrative structure that is used. So if you look at this film from the lens of a three-act structure, there is of course the fact that the first act, where the inciting incident happens, is when Sue comes to India and decides to shoot a film with them. Now at this point, the characters are have very different opinions about society. They feel that there is a sense of nihilism in their voices about the society. But then the process of shooting this film makes them realize that that nihilistic attitude cannot be useful at the end of the day, and that is why they get transformed into something which is the polar opposite of their initial self. And I think, if all stories are to be interpreted to have that kind of character transformation where your hero goes through a struggle and comes out of and wins or loses. I think this is the classic example of whatever poetics by Aristotle, right? And but what differs here is the fact that the story is told to through two parallel time frames, right? So there is this there's always this intercut between the past with Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, etc., and the present, where these people are also undergoing a transformation. And that itself, I thought, was a very interesting choice. I really don't know of any other films which make that choice. And moreover, I don't know of any film which makes that choice and blends it so seamlessly with the cinematic aspects. So generally, there are some movies which rely heavily on the writing and not much on the cinema of it. But there are other movies, let's say like Memento, which have this narrative structure, but still use interesting cinematic, choice, still have interesting cinematic choices when they choose to tell that story. And Rang De Basanti, I think, is in the league of Memento when it comes to that.
Right. Interesting comparison that you make there. I also think that what I liked about the structuring was that, see, there are many ways of showing transformation, right? And what they have done here is they have narrated two stories. They have narrated the story of India's independence and the struggle that, the characters went about during that. They've also narrated the story of DJ and his friends, and the transformation that they go through. But the way these transformations have been merged, so that you do not need to see a lot of transformation of DJ to understand what has happened to his character, because you are seeing Chandrasekhar Azad doing stuff on the screen, and you know that DJ is inculcating a bit of Chandrasekhar Azad as he is acting. You see Siddharth, who's Karan, change from being Karan to being a more arguably Bhagat Singh version of himself, right? Without even seeing a lot of changes in that character, in the character of Karan per se, because you've been seeing Bhagat Singh's role. You know the sort of, you can draw on it. You can see that happening, right? So that is very interesting. The second part is that it is, I think it is. I mean, before this in Bollywood, I'm not claiming to have watched all freedom fighter movies and stuff, but I've watched a couple of versions at least of Bhagat Singh and other movies. But what I feel is what this movie did was portray that same thing in a format that was very digestible by the youth. Again, I go back to the graphic novel format without. Uh, I don't know, it was just very digestible. I'll tell you how. If you look at scenes of Chandrasekhar Azad escaping, they are scored with rock music, and they are scored with slow motion shots and all these. So what that does is, in my head, that creates a sort of myth around that scene, and in that myth, I start imagining how the characters at that time might be feeling. I start imagining the vigor of those characters, right? In doing that, I can then relate to these characters more. I never related with Bhagat Singh when I was, let's say, watching an Ajay Devgan Bhagat Singh or a Bobby Deol Bhagat Singh,
Right.
right? First of all, yes, because I was very young when I was watching them, and second, also because the way Bhagat Singh there was shown was a very idealistic way to show Bhagat Singh.
Mhm.
But now, when you set a young Bhagat Singh in this sort of a setting, and you score him the way you do, and you picturize his scenes the way you do, that sort of brings in the cool aspect of it.
I mean, I had one thought, and I read it also somewhere that the famous title song, not the title song, one of the famous songs of that Ajay Devgan Bhagat Singh was Pagdi Sambhal Jatta. Now, especially for the current day youth who are not, I mean, also like people we might know as well, who are not, very cognizant of history or anything. Pagdi Sambhal Jata does not resonate with them. Like nobody wears a pagdi now. The only way that might resonate with them is in a historical context, not in their current context. And I think that is what this film sets does very well, as you said.
Also, if you look at it, I mean, to a young mind, right?
Mhm.
And I'll also go to the extent of saying a young, ignorant mind. The concept of a nation and the love for a nation might be a tough concept to imbibe. What I mean to say is, while patriotism comes naturally to you, but the the passion to fight for it, or the passion to defend it, at least from with respect to our generation, we we weren't we weren't really witnesses of Kargil. We have been post that, we have been witnesses of cricket matches where the maximum rivalry tension is there. And I'm not ignoring the border disputes, of course, but I'm just saying that that is where our sense of pride comes out in its maximum form, right? So what I'm trying to say is, so in this sort of a movie where we need our youth to, let's say, relate with these characters, we need to base these characters and the youth in more fundamental needs. So, so then you start talking about security, right? Because security as a concept is more relatable, is more digestible than the concept of a nation at large, right? So that is one effective thing the movie does. Secondly, my the question that came up in my head while I was watching, and this question is a structural question also, is why does the narrator, or why does the uh, prime character that I'm following in this movie have to be a British girl? Why was that instrument chosen in this movie, and what implication does that have on this movie, the way it is shown? Because if you look at it, the a lot of narration in the movie is done by the British girl's grandfather, who was party to the injustice that was meted out to these people. That becomes a very interesting narrative choice for me. So what do you think about that?
The fact why the narrator had to be British.
Yeah,
Uh,
not had to be British, was chosen to be British, and how that would have changed the story.
Right. So, it's, I think the idea of that choice was to have somebody who's distant from the country, meaning distant from the whole issue of the independence struggle, and also distant from the way in which youngsters in the country lead their life at this moment, but also sympathetic towards them. So there was no empathy that she generated. For example, if you see, even when she goes and uh, tells the story, pitches the story to her bosses in England, she pitches the fact that this is in my grandfather's diary. He writes about these people who were what, like 20, 30 years old, and walked into the what do you say, to get hanged. Now, there, for her, it's an emotional story of her grandfather or great grandfather, whoever it was, right? It's not yet the story that she relates to in an current Indian context. And we also start off with that sort of um, what do you say, unknowingness about the whole thing. And gradually, as the movie nears its third act, when R Madhavan's plane crashes, is when we become when Sue, by the way, till the end, does not opine on what they should do, right? Like, she has no part to play in the decisions that they take. If you remember, she has no part to play in the decisions to protest. She has no part to play in the decisions to go and ransack the All India Radio office. Nothing. She is just a passive, okay, a passive spectator, in the sense she's almost like a uh, traveler who's writing her own travelogue while she's in India. So she is basically doing the same thing that her grandfather did, whatever, 80, 90 years ago. So I viewed it as that, basically. One more thing is that if that would have been Indian, that would have come up with, like, that would have. I mean, there would not be character contrast at all between the different characters there. There is, let's say, there is like an extreme left which consists of these rebels, these friends. There's an extreme right which consists of the government and the ministers, etc. And there's like a center, Sue, which is just a mute spectator to the fight between them. And if you take out Sue, there is nobody who is what do you say, passive spectator, in the sense. Of course, she
Agreed.
decides things, but she's not a participatory element in any of the decisions that the characters make.
While you were speaking, I also figured that one thing that this movie did very effectively was contextualize and sort of um, help the youth understand the freedom struggle and the politics of the freedom struggle in contemporary situations. So the parallel that the movie uses, in that this is something that could happen to that friend of yours who has gone into the army, or to anyone, in fact, in the by extrapolation. I think that is very effective in sort of bringing out how it is not very different. The rulers there and the rulers here are not very different.
Yeah, so I think that is the main point, that there is a certain class of rulers, as I said earlier, there's a certain class of rulers are ruling now, who are not very different from the English. Sure, we've gotten independence, we have our own constitution, we can elect people, and we are not at the behest of some foreign nation, but we are still at the behest of certain politicians who are as bad as, if not worse, as compared to the British, right? I'm no means making a statement that we should go back to British rule. I would never want that. But that is the thing. And the point is, people always keep arguing, right? For a country which is the youngest nation in the world, why is the parliament the oldest body in the world? Right? I mean, it's the average age of the Council of Ministers is something like 50 or something, right? I don't know, probably even more than 50. I don't know. So, like, the only below 40 prime minister that we've had, or like 40 age prime minister we have had, is Rajiv Gandhi, of all people, right? And that we all know that he got it because his mom passed away. So why is that? Like, and I think that is the question that this movie is trying to answer. Like, when this millennial generation, people who were born in the late 80s or early 80s, and who were 18 or 20 or 25 when this movie released, they have had a, a, a fundamentally different upbringing as compared to their parents' generation or their grandfather's generation, because they've seen the globalizing world. They have had more access to things which are truly international than their ancestors would have. And and then the premise is that the old order needs to be rethrown in a typical Marxist way. The old order needs to be thrown, and then there's a new revolution that the country needs, and that this is the start of that revolution. And yeah, so
Yeah. Uh, so yeah, we discussed why the use of the narrator and what this story was doing to the country, why it was effective. Um, you said you wanted to also talk about the subtext.
Mhm. Yeah, so before going to the subtext, I would like to start off the soundtrack. And by soundtrack, I just don't mean
Yeah.
the songs, as in the songs which are there in the songs list of the film. Okay, self-confessed, very big Rahman fan. I think I've listened to almost all his albums he's ever created. So I the point is, I think while people really love, and especially, actually no, both in the north and the south, uh, though people really relish his songs that he's made for these movies, one thing that people often forget about Rahman is that he is also probably the best background scorer we have had ever, right? And you know, take for example the first scene where these people go to get hanged. Siddharth's character Bhagat Singh is going to get hanged, and the choice of the music there. It starts off with a Punjabi tune. Okay, it when they are on the gallows, it goes to a rock riff, and then there's an Arabic, uh, what you say, melody that comes in the between, and then everything merges. And that particular background score is there at different points in the film and is used for extremely rousing effect. And you can't call that a Western song, because it has these huge Indian influences. And I think that is the beauty of Rahman, that he brings across sounds across so many cultures, which are extremely simple. Where Indian cinema has a time where most of the songs relied on these huge, I don't know how many piece orchestras performing together in the same studio at the same time. But what Rahman brought to the music industry is that he said that you don't need 100,000 instruments to make a song. All you need, in at least in the late 90s and early 2000s, when he started making songs, uh, he said that you all you need is like two different instruments and good ways of combining them. For example, take the song Yaire Yaire from Rangila, Hoja Rangila Re. It has just a tuk 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 tuk, just like a small drum beating, and there's nothing else for probably 1 minute. And there's just, of course, Lata Mangeshkar's voice. Lata Mangeshkar or Asha Bhosle, one of their voice, right? And that is the beauty of Rahman's music. Like you take it even in this background score that I'm talking about. It's just three different tracks which have come together, and it provides the film. The film again, as I said, is trying to say that it's the country needs a new revolution, not just in 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 the political system, but also in the way that the country makes movies. And that's exactly what Rang De Basanti was. And that exactly is what the soundtrack of the movie also reflected. Now, coming to the actual songs of the film, um, I like the fact that the songs also reflect the mood that the characters are in. We start off with Masti Ki Pathshala, where, which literally says, we're the rebels, but rebels not against a political system of the country or not rebels against injustice, but rebels against, in some sense, their parents saying, or the educational system saying we don't want to study and we don't want to, it's like we don't need no education. It's not a political commentary, right? So it's that kind of like we just want to fucking chill out. That's it. That's what our generation wants to do. Then we move into, and then there's of course Rang De Basanti, and there's the whole fun aspect of it. Then we transition slowly into maa wala so nahi uske pehle is Khalbali.
तू बिन बताए.
Yeah, Tu Bin Bataya is of course just a romantic song. I think it was just added there for effect.
No, Khalbali before.
Yeah, Khalbali is before that, right? So basically, there is literally a Khalbali in their heads, right? Because that is the point where we see that they are trying to change. In fact, the song picturization itself includes cuts back and forth between images of the past and images of the current day. And uh, and the Khalbali, the literal Khalbali in the song is also meant to signify the Khalbali in their heads, the transition that is happening in their heads. And then there is a song of Khoon Chala and what a Luka Chupi, which Khoon Chala is of course the revolution song, which is meant to mirror the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And then in the end, there is the Rubaru, which is the awakening song. Like it's more like the Nirvana song that we have got Nirvana and we have realized the true purpose in our lives. So I really like the way the songs are placed across the film, and I think Rakeysh Omprakash Mehra has done this across his films. I've not watched his first film Ups, nor have I watched in full his last film Mirzya. But if you look at least the other two films that he's made, Delhi Six and Bhag Milkha Bhag, you see that it's the classic use of song in Indian films, right? To mimic a character's mood, but done in a different way. Like for example, in one of the beautiful song sequences in Delhi Six is Dil Gira Daftan, where there is this intercut between Delhi and New York, which is mind blowing. Now, and now it also reminds me, it's funny how Rakesh Omprakash Mehra tries to, unite the past and the present in his movies. Like, of course, Rang De Basanti, Delhi Six, it's very overt, the fact that he wants to unite the past and the present, and even in Mirzya and not in Bhag Milkha Bhag so much. But anyway, so I like the fact that there is so much subtext in the songs about the characters' moods and their motivations.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, even if you look at the lyrics of the songs,
Sharman
if you
Joshi,
look at Masti Ki Pathshala, the lyrics they say so much about about what the youth is currently invested in.
mhm,
हर दिल में बुलबुल करता है H2SO4 है, and a lot of things. Then you have something as spirited and as free as Rubaru,
mhm,
or you have Khalbali, where the youth are trying to break forth and break out, and yeah, I mean, in fact, Luka Chupi has some of the most beautiful lyrics. Um,
man, I cry every time I hear that song, like without fail. It's never happened that I've heard that song, heard somebody singing that song, and I've not like a tear has not flown in my eyes. I don't know every time.
Shout out to a friend who sings it beautifully. Yeah, the music helps you uh, ground that feeling in the audience. I mean, it really helps. And now that I think of it, even Bhag Milka Bhag, Mirzia also to some extent, and Delhi Six definitely are known for their albums. Also are known for their soundtracks because they have amazing soundtracks.
Yeah, Mirza
Okay.
actually I think is a
Um.
very underrated album. It's one of the best albums
Yeah.
of Shankar Ehsaan Loy, and it has Gulzar lyrics,
Yeah.
of course. And it's mind blowing, but people don't know about it because it was not a big hit. And if so,
Yeah.
people listening to this, please go and listen to Mirza's soundtrack.
Yes. Now let's move to the subtext of the movie then, and let's try and understand what was happening there and what is the sort of politics, or what is the sort of, yeah, what is the commentary that the movie is trying to make.
Yeah,
Right?
so I mean, two things before that, I mean, I don't think this, as I said earlier, also, I don't think this movie is made keeping a certain kind of audience in mind. It is, it is probably made keeping the youth in mind, but that's it. Uh, and there are certain choices in the film that make it extremely mainstream. For example, and I'm not, they're extremely effective choices as well. So, for example, look at the song Luka Chipi, right? Um, there is a small gap where the song is not playing and they're in the house of Wahida Rahman's house, basically. And then somebody knocks on the door and she goes to open the door. And the moment she opens the door, the song "Kaise Tujhko Batao Yahan Hai Kya" starts playing. That's the epitome of emotion and melodrama, right? Like she's seeing these people bring in what you say, the her son's remains, in the sense remaining clothes and things like that, and she is literally breaking down, and that is when the song starts playing. There's another scene, for example, where Atul Kulkarni's character is reciting the Sarfadoshi ki tamanna just because he knows it. Right. I mean, like, it's not like, actual people would actually do it in their real life. It's not very plausible that they happen. And so this film is extremely melodramatic in that sense. And in fact, that is what I love about it, because it's one of those, you know, and me being a lover of the mainstream, I just love it when somebody creates such beautiful art even in the mainstream. Now, coming to what this film is trying to say. So, as I said, the message of the film, I think, is pretty uh, across the board, in the sense it's pretty universal, at least within the universe of young people. And there are, of course, a few ideas that I don't agree with. So, one thing is that people generally tend to call it a fascist or anarchist kind of film, where these youth are trying to just take powers into their hands and just go and kill the ministers. Right. Now, uh, 12 years back, and this is the beauty of the film, and this ties back into why the film is set in a mainstream tone, is that I believed everything that they did, and I was convinced with everything that the characters did in the film, because felt motivated enough. But now, when I watch it, the things that the characters do, for example, ransack All India Radio office, kill a minister. That does not align with my ideology of how to solve things. So, in that context, it's a film that raises a lot of questions and make you think when you're out of watching the film. Did the characters, what did the characters do was right? Did the characters, is the process of transformation of the characters justified? Were they brainwashed into doing it? Things like that. And I think those are all very valid questions to ask, especially in the current day and age, where we are now, a big fraction of the youth is actually contemplating how we should protest around, protest are the politicians who are actually doing extremely unlawful also at times things, right? So I think it's these things give you enough meat to discuss and understand what are the ways of organizing a successful protest, and is anything that you do in the process, like, is everything justified? So I think it's a nice thing to think about.
Yeah. I don't know where my perspective lies, also because I'm very scared to say it. But uh, so here's the thing. What I think is a lot of the things that they did came from a place that might not have been relatable or might not have been registered because it was not hammered in enough. So here's what I mean. Their close friend has died, right? He was a person who loved the nation. He was a person who was willing to die for the nation. He died saving a town, saving a part of Ambala where the plane would have crashed. He willingly stayed in the plane and redirected it, and in the event of the crash, he died. The uh, what the rulers do, the ministers, what they do is they spin the narrative and turn him into a what they call a Nausikhiya pilot, and they find flaws in his flying rather than accepting that there was corruption involved. While this has happened, first of all, okay, there is obviously the subjectivity of truth here because matlab whether the pilot is good or not, while it does have certifications and ratings and everything, but denying that when a certain force is trying to put that in your head is tough. So that is one layer of frustration that these characters get. The second layer of frustration that these characters get is that when they stage a protest or when they, let's say, kill that minister, and that is obviously something that is debatable and that is like wrong. uh, so when they do that, what is happening is the narrative or their viewpoints are still not being put forth by the media,
Yes.
which is their only instrument of communication to the larger public. What they want to highlight by killing that minister or by taking action against that minister, where that action is coming from a very helpless place where they want to get their voice across. The parallel that was used i- between this and the freedom struggle was the parallel that Bhagat Singh said that we need to get captured to spread our voice, right? What is also very important to understand is that at that point of time, probably larger forces in the media and the press were on the side of this person who was getting arrested so that his voice is spread.
Mhm.
In the current context and in the movie's context, it is not so.
Correct. Yeah.
A large chunk of the media is not on your side.
Mhm.
There are people currently, there are political prisoners, there are people who have been jailed, whose voices have been curbed because of the fact that they are jailed,
Correct.
right? Which is contrary to what their ideology was.
Mm.
So now here, just to get their voice across, they need to do things that actually create impact. क्योंकि as भगत सिंह says, जब लोग बहरे हो जाते हैं उन्हें सुनाई नहीं देता तो धमाके की जरूरत होती है,
Mm.
is what they are following, right? Now, even if you look at it, even Bhagat Singh had faced a lot of flack from, let's say, the softer side of Congress, or let's say from Gandhiji also, because of his methods or because of his, debated ideology or advocacy of violence.
Mhm.
But the point was that a certain amount of attention was needed. That point is what I think is displayed very effectively with going to the All India radio station,
Mm.
because that is literally the one source that we look at right now when we talk about which is the medium that actually reaches out to majority of the population in the country.
It's not all India radio, but like you could say
Whatever radio station it is,
yeah.
sorry, yeah, whatever radio
All
station
India
it
radio,
is.
I don't think has much listenership now. Of course, it had 13 years ago, but not anymore.
हाँ वो तो ठीक है, मतलब that can obviously be spoken about, but if you are just talking in terms of audience, why use radio, right? uh, so now what happens is that is used very effectively, and that I feel is very relevant and is very relatable in the current format
Mm.
also,
Mm.
where because the media has gone numb or the media has just I don't know what has happened to it.
Yeah.
I don't know how people can be such so blatantly dumb.
Mm.
Whatever. Anyways, I'll save the rant. So when that is happening, you see a lot of independent creators come forth on more democratic platforms like, let's say, YouTube,
Uh-huh.
and where they try and push their opinions and their arguments. Anyways, so there is a huge. I think what is warranted here is a discussion on justice
Mm-hmm.
and on truth. That if a larger force, in this case the state itself,
Yes.
is trying to peddle a narrative or a lie against you,
Mm.
what can you do as an individual citizen, or let's say as a group of citizens, what can you do to re-establish your truth or to spread your narrative in
Right.
the mainstream
Your
is the
propaganda,
question.
so to say, where propaganda is not
Sorry.
necessary. Your propaganda, not where propaganda is not necessarily a bad word, right? It was made a
Yeah,
bad
yeah, yeah.
word.
Your agenda, how do you push your agenda first?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that is what I mean when I say that this concept is probably going to stick around and stay relevant forever. I mean, because this will always happen. The battle between truth and propaganda, or let's say trying to curb voices of people, will always be there.
Right. Of course.
And that is why what happens in this movie will always be relevant. Yes, maybe their ways of doing it, maybe the methods were wrong,
Mm.
but that was one way, and that was when they were driven up against the wall.
Correct. Yeah. So
It is not yeah.
in some sense, what
Go
they
on.
did, the way in which they did it, it was extremely Marxist in the sense it was a bloody revolution, right? And
Yeah,
that's exactly what Bhagat Singh meant it to be. He was a
yeah,
he used to read Marx a lot. Um,
yeah.
whether that is
He's been shown to read Lenin.
exactly Lenin, yes, exactly. Now, whether that itself is relevant in the current day, very debatable, right? That's the difference between the extreme left and the extreme right. But the idea of protest and the idea of you know a powerful trying to curb the voices of the powerless or like the not extremely powerful is going to be there around for a long time. And I think one thing that I was surprised, and a lot of people also say that this film was responsible uh, for, in some sense, the 2010, 11, 12, whatever, India Against Corruption movement, led by Anna Hazare, Arvind Kejriwal, and all. And so that, people came out in large numbers to, protest. My only thing is, like, is that, like, why is that not happening now? Is that there? Sure, we have had CAA protests for which a lot of people came. Maybe the government then was just more lighter because they in the end had to give way to Anna Hazare's demands. But now the government now has not budged even a bit because of the CAA protest, because of the Ram Janmabhoomi protest, or because of the Kashmir 370 protests, right? So, what is a good way of protesting? Is killing people a good way of protesting? Because if a person is going to do that, then if an armed revolution is really the way forward, then there is literally no difference between the RSS and us. Nathuram Godse literally killed Gandhi, and that is the party that is ruling India right now. And right, uh, but is that the way that one should obtain? I struggle with this a lot because I don't relate, for example, to Karan Singh Hania's ideas in the earlier part of the film that you just the moment I get a ticket out of here, I'm out. I don't believe in that because I'm convinced that wherever I go, I'll be in a cesspool of shit. And the only way that some people can choose to remain, neutral about that cesspool, maybe, but I don't think I can, and that's the way. And hence, I often keep thinking to myself, what is the best way to protest? What is the best way to get our voices heard when so much is stacked against you? So yeah, I mean, this film gives you more thought for that. that particular idea.
And that also brings me to the second point that this film was driving for me, which I wanted to speak about, was that when you talk about why is it not happening now, one thing that I'm constantly going back to is watching Fir Bhi Dil Hai Hindustani at some point of in my childhood,
Right.
and then wondering ऐसे थोड़ी होता है.
Ah,
Like people don't actually come out on streets or
of
something.
course not.
People don't come out on streets waving the tricolor. And the irony is I was living in Bengal,
Yeah.
but uh, but apparently it did. It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
And now I'm almost thankful that it does.
Mm.
Um, but if you look at it, one thing also that this film brings to the fore is the relation between the student and the state,
Mm.
which has been highlighted over the past, I think, 4 years. It has been now since the J. That has constantly been brought up and that has constantly been highlighted. And both of us, even currently, are parts of academic institutions.
Mm. Mm.
So, uh, so here what happens is, if you remember one scene where there's the foreshadowing of the plane crash incident, uh, we see Karan Singhania looking at that television, looking at that piece of news about MiG-21s and the scandal behind them, and him saying, "What is this depressive shit?" and depressing shit, and then just he just changes channels, I think, or he moves on. That is something that I've seen a lot in my own circles also.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The willingness and the ease with which people can turn their heads away.
Mhm.
It is okay, it is all right, it is a matter of personal choice, and one might come and say that, well, I'm choosing my battles and this is not one battle that I'm standing for,
Exactly.
which is all right, sure. But then the problem with this battle is that it is not a battle in isolation.
Mhm.
When I mean it is like cancer,
Mhm.
that that if you don't start treating it, or if you don't start addressing it when it is affecting the lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder, it climbs up the ladder
Mhm.
and ultimately it will reach you.
Mhm.
And at that point, when you go out to raise your voice,
Mhm.
well, I hope there are voices on our side.
Yeah.
uh,
Right. I mean,
right.
and you're right, and these generally people do not. I mean, from my experience, there are two reasons why people don't pick these battles. One is that they are sincerely apathetic towards it. They have like they don't care about it really, and they don't want to care about it. That is the first thing. The second thing is, and that is also there for a large proportion of people, is that they think that if they try to speak against it, it will impact their own life, which is which, as we've seen around the country, it's exceedingly true, right? It's there people are being jailed for what they speak about. People are being put in, people are having like cases against them, in like, I don't know, in a the death of a of a film star, just because they speak up against the government, right? So I mean, these things are happening, and this is like a just a reactionary tactic by the state. It is in some sense spreading terrorism. What is the meaning of terrorism? That you spread terror, that you spread fear of a certain entity, and this is a form of terrorism. It's a terrorism of the new age. It's a neo capitalist terrorism, if you want to call it that. But yeah, that's it. It is that, and I don't know if I should blame those people, because, like for example, I don't know if you can blame, for example, women, right? They have their own battles to take. They're fighting battles at every stage in their academic, professional, personal lives, and if they also have to fight the battles even for their country, it's it's probably an unfair expectation to have from anybody, not just women, right? So yeah, I do understand that, the student life is a more, in some sense, secure, isolated life where you can do all these things. But as you grow older, probably the weight of expectations on you just outweigh everything else.
Sure, exactly, and that is why students are also important
Mhm.
in the society,
Right.
because they are free in that sense.
Mhm. And that's exactly what the state is trying to curb, right? What the state is trying to do is that it's saying that it's the classic uncle आर्ग्यूमेंट, राइट, कि भाई तुम लोग को क्या आता है, तुम लोग तो बस स्टेट का पैसा मतलब खर्च कर रहे हो और तुम लोग पढ़ाई कर रहे हो, तुमको क्या आता है. So that is the argument, right, which is there's this inherent superiority complex that is trying to pervade in the society, like in disseminate in society. And how do you counter that? It's extremely tough.
Yeah, I mean, people who say that students shouldn't be concerned with all of this right now, or students should focus on their careers or all of that. Well, my simple question to them often is that then why did you teach us?
Hmm.
Why did you teach us to learn? Because if we can learn, then we learn about history, then we read about intellectual people. And intellectual is in quotes here because intellectual being an intellectual is of like is almost an expletive now.
Yeah.
So when that is spoken about, then my question is that फिर क्यों पढ़ाया, मतलब फिर नहीं पढ़ाते. अगर तुम हमें अनअवेयर रखते तो हम अनअवेयर रहते, आप जैसा कहते हैं हम वैसा करते, right? Anyways, so I mean, even right now, I was attending a talk by Smriti Irani, and we had questioned her. There were questions on a lot of things. One of the questions, of course, because she has held relevant ministries to women, was also of the impact of this COVID, this entire COVID thing on women and their employability and their state in general. And she spoke very gracefully about just the conditions and the policies and a lot of actions that they have taken for the welfare of women, not only in their houses, not only in Anganwadi systems, not only in uh, other state institutions, but also in jails, in fact. And they just instantly threw me back to Safura Sarkar, and I was like, "Are you sure? Are you sure of what you're talking about? Because I can at least cite one example here where this was clearly in violation." But anyways, that is how things are. Hypocrisy ki seema, well, debatable. So I don't know how to end this episode. There is a lot that can be spoken about. There is a lot that needs to be spoken about.
Yeah, let me
And
just
I
say,
think,
let me just say that, I mean, I'll give, sorry, I am interrupting, but let me just say that, Rang De Basanti is that kind of film. See, it's not a perfect film. Like, you can always say, why the fuck did they, change in the last scene, one of the ending scenes? Why did they have to superimpose the pictures of, the young
huh, huh,
Bhagat Singh and them on one
yeah,
screen? Or why did they
yeah.
have to show the minister killing R. Madhavan in a Jallianwala Bagh like thing? You-
Hmm.
Sure, there are questions to be asked about the artistic aspects of the film, but I think there are very few films, especially films that come out of mainstream India and mainstream Hindi, let me just say, that allow you to ask so many questions. I mean, the last half an hour of the podcast, or like 20 minutes of the podcast, we've just discussed current day politics and its relevance to our lives. There are very few films that actually make you do this, right? One brilliant example of this is Kala, which everybody should watch. I think it's a film by Rajnikant. Um, but yeah, and I think that is what Rang De Basanti manages so well, and which is why it remains relevant, and it will probably remain relevant for the next at least 20-30 years at least. The second thing why I like the film a lot is because of Aamir Khan. I hate Aamir Khan as an actor. I don't think he's a good actor, but I think this is his bravest choice so far in a career that has been riddled with unbrave choices. Especially the last decade of his films has been all playing, morally superior, these characters who always win in the end. And Rang De Basanti was a welcome change, and that is also
Akshay
a
Kumar
tipping point.
types.
Yeah, exactly. It's you. I don't realize why Aamir Khan is held in such a different breath as as compared to Akshay Kumar, right? I mean, Aamir Khan, sure, he is not a stooge of the current government, but still, he's doing all these morally superior, T-complex wala roles, and yeah, what a fuck. Yeah. Anyway, Devansh, please end. How do you
I
want
mean,
to end the episode?
yeah, I mean, this is not like, I don't want to talk about the movie because there's so much to talk about. But my last thought of it is that revisit the movie,
Mm,
maybe think about it.
mm,
And I mean, it is, see, it is very convenient at the level of privilege that we exist. It is very convenient to turn our face away from things. It
mm,
is very convenient for us not to know why farmers are protesting and to dismiss it off as just another thing. It is very convenient for us to go on social media and blatantly type out that should be no need of highlighting that the deceased victim
is
was Dalit,
yeah.
right? Without knowing on ground realities.
Mm,
So all of that is very easy to do, and I'm not saying that it is wrong, right? You have I mean, you have all your right to have whatever opinion you have, but it is at least important to know that it is high time that we step out of our bubbles to at least see and be aware of what is happening around, because, well, it is about time that we start voting, of course, if we haven't already. One, and second, that shit is soon gonna hit the roof, and when that happens, it will also affect all of us.
mhm.
So if not, raise your voices against things. I am not trying to incite anything. I am not trying to provoke anything. I am just saying, if not raising your voice up against something, let's try and know about more things. Even I am at fault here, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I guess that's a good time to end the episode then. So, this episode will finally release on 2nd October, which happens to be Gandhi Jayanti. But of course, what we have talked in this film is mostly about Bhagat Singh and his army of revolutionaries. And Bhagat Singh's Jayanti was also this week on 28th. And yeah, I mean, hopeful that this film lasts in remembrance of Bhagat Singh and also the spirit of protest. I don't want to call it revolution because that word has different context connotations in the current day. But at least the spirit of protest against injustice is kept alive. Um, Thank you for listening in. We know this was probably a longish episode, which where we just went into a lot of tangents about society in the current day. But if you liked or didn't like what we discussed or have any opinions on what we discussed, so yeah, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Cut to Scene. You can find me Aditya on at Ati Vijay Kumar on Instagram. At also goes by me on Twitter, and Devansh on at Devnash on Instagram and Twitter. We really would like to know what you thought of our discussion in the episode. So please let us know what you thought about it. And yeah, we will be back again uh, before you know it next week. And Devansh, you want to say something?
Yeah, so the disclaimer was only that if you have noticed, our format has sort of evolved or developed or whatever you want to call it, deteriorated maybe. But what we have started doing over the past few episodes is that we have started uh, also talking about the social implications of the film and what the film was trying to say, and what is the meaning that we made out of it, because we also started feeling that probably not doing that and just discussing the craft of it uh, leaves cinema halfway through. I mean, if we do not discuss what we understood of that craft and of the way the director and the writer and everyone came together to make that film and what they wanted to actually say about it. If we do not discuss that, then we are doing half the job that we were here to do. Um, so that is one thing that we were trying to do. And second was that, I mean, second is the obvious thing. No offense to anyone, no offense to anyone's views. Everyone is free to have whatever views they want, and we are just sort of we just use this as a space to have discussions and banter about films and larger topics that might be extrapolated from that discussion. So yeah, that is all that. Anything to add, me?
No, I think both of us actually think of films as something that reflects society, and that is also one reason I believe that you should watch all films and read all books, how much ever you can. And yeah, I think if as Devansh mentioned, if you're talking about films and not discussing the social, especially a film like Rang De Basanti, which has so many social implications, then you're not probably not doing a good job. At least that's what we feel about it. So yeah, I guess on that note, we'll end the episode. Devansh? Okay. Chalo,
Yes.
bye-bye, guys.
Bye bye.
Next time. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.